The heart monitor shrieked into the silence, a flat line cutting through the dim light of the intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital in Richmond, Virginia. The intercom blared overhead, urgent and cold. Code blue. ICU, code blue. Nurses surged into the room, the crash cart rattling against the tiled floor, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air. The doctor's voice rang out, firm and clipped. Clear. A jolt of electricity arced across Richard Carter's chest, his body arching, then collapsing back against the bed. The monitor flickered, then screamed again, mocking every effort. Suzanne Matthews pushed past the cluster of staff, her own breath shallow, as if her lungs had tightened in sympathy with his. She shouldn't be here, not in the thick of it, not with so many eyes. But she leaned in close, her voice breaking into a whisper meant only for him. I won't forget, Richard, I swear. Her fingers brushed his damp hand, and in that touch was the weight of a promise forged not in paperwork or procedure but in the raw ache of humanity. Another shock. The room stank of ozone. A nurse counted aloud. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, as compressions drove into his chest. A desperate rhythm against the quiet inevitability of death. Outside in the hallway, Daisy, the hospital's therapy dog, let out a single sharp bark and then went still, her paws planted as if she knew that something irreversible hung in the balance. Suzanne's throat burned as she stepped back, her mind splintering. Around her, voices layered like static, push epi, now. Charge again. We're losing him. But all she heard was Richard's voice from nights ago, soft and steady. Don't let them bury me without passing something on. She squeezed her eyes shut, hearing again his plea, the second wish he'd whispered in a room too small to contain its enormity. Not the first, the impossible request she had already refused, but the second, the one that haunted her. His breath had been ragged when he said it, but his eyes had been alive with urgency. If I go, don't let it end here. There's a boy next door who still has a chance. My kidneys could buy him tomorrow. Another shock snapped her back to the present. The monitor beeped erratically, then dipped again, the line falling. We're at 30 minutes, the doctor barked. Suzanne's nails dug into her palms, leaving crescents of pain that tethered her to the room, to the choice she had made. She had promised him. Not in some abstract, ceremonial way, but in the hushed dark of midnight, where rules blurred and a man's mortality sat naked between them. Stay with us, Richard, a nurse cried. But Suzanne knew whether he lived another hour or another day. His body was failing, and the window was closing for the boy whose life still hung by a thread just a few doors away. She glanced toward the door, her chest heavy with a truth no one else in this room understood. What was at stake wasn't just Richard's heartbeat. It was the justice of a promise. The dignity of a dying man's final choice. The defibrillator paddles slapped down again. Clear. Another violent surge. His chest rose, fell. A faint flicker returned, wavering, fragile. For a breath, everyone froze. The entire room suspended between hope and futility. Suzanne's voice trembled as she bent low once more, her lips near his ear. I'm here. I'll fight for you. Even if no one else will. No one noticed, or if they did, they pretended not to. The ICU was a battlefield. But battles were not always against disease. Sometimes, they were against bureaucracy, fear, and the quiet cruelty of delay. A doctor called for labs, another for intubation. Suzanne stepped back, her pulse hammering. Her vow echoed louder than the alarms, louder than the chaos. I won't forget. She didn't know yet how she would keep it, only that she must. The monitor beeped weakly, holding to a rhythm like a candle guttering in the wind. Daisy whimpered outside the door, a soft sound that cut through the noise like a prayer. The staff kept working, relentless. But Suzanne's eyes were fixed not only on the fragile body before her, but on the shadow of the boy who waited unknowingly next door. The one Richard had chosen as his legacy. And though the outcome of this night was still uncertain, Suzanne knew with the clarity of a woman pushed past the boundary of doubt. The fight for Richard's wish had already begun, and she would not stand down. If you felt Suzanne's heartbeat in this moment, if you've ever known the weight of keeping a promise whispered at the edge of life and death, leave a comment below and tell us how you would honor it. And don't forget to like this story, because justice is not always loud, but it deserves to be heard. The night before the chaos, Suzanne had been moving briskly down the hall with her medication tray, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, when she stopped at room 308. Richard Carter was awake, propped against his pillows, his eyes steady and strangely calm for a man tethered to machines. As she checked his IV and recorded his vitals, he spoke softly, almost like he was telling her a secret no one else could hear. Read this when you're alone, he said, slipping a folded piece of paper into her pocket with a hand that trembled but still carried intent. She nodded quickly, not daring to look at it while she was on the floor. For the rest of her shift, the paper burned against her hip like a live coal. She gave meds, answered call lights, smiled at patients. But in every pause her fingers brushed that folded corner, as if it might speak through the fabric. Finally, on her short break, she ducked into an empty supply closet, the shelves stacked with gauze and saline. With the door closed, she leaned against the wall, her breath quick. She opened the paper. The handwriting was neat, almost formal. Come to my room at midnight. It's urgent, come alone. Her chest tightened. Midnight was a line she wasn't supposed to cross. The training drilled into her never blur boundaries. Never become more than caregiver rose like a wall. Yet her gut told her this wasn't about romance. Wasn't about anything tawdry. Richard carried a heaviness, and she had seen it each time he spoke. Midnight came slowly. She sat in the break room with her untouched tea, the clock ticking louder than her heartbeat. Every instinct told her to clock out and go home. She could picture her small apartment, the soft quilt her grandmother had stitched, the comfort of anonymity. But then she imagined Richard lying awake, waiting, wondering why she hadn't come. At 11:57 she pushed away from the table, her shoes tapping down the dim corridor. When she reached his door, it was slightly ajar. She pushed gently. The room was washed in amber light from a single lamp. Richard was sitting upright, his hospital gown draped under a dark robe, his face pale but his gaze steady. You came, he said, and there was gratitude in his voice, not surprise. She closed the door partway behind her, careful not to lock it. What's so urgent, Richard? She asked, keeping her tone professional, though her palms felt damp. He gestured to the chair beside his bed. She sat, leaving a polite space. If this is about pain, she started. I can call the physician. It's not the pain, he interrupted gently. It's about time. I don't have much left, Suzanne. And I need to tell someone who will actually listen. His fingers knotted in the blanket. My family's gone. The car accident 2 years ago, it took my mother, my father, my sisters. Everyone. I walked away alive, but broken. And then came this heart, failing more each day. The doctors don't say it. But I know. I feel it. She listened. Her throat tightening. He was 28. Only a few years older than her. She couldn't imagine carrying that loss. His eyes found hers. I don't want my story to end like this, with me. I want something to carry us forward. A child, Suzanne. Someone to bear the Carter name, someone who remembers we lived. The room froze around her. She blinked, stunned. Richard. She whispered. You don't even know me outside this hospital. I'm 24. I'm not ready to be a mother. I have goals I haven't touched. You're asking too much. His gaze didn't waver. I'm not asking you to marry me, not to give up your life, just to give part of it. To make sure we don't vanish. Her heart pounded with the enormity of it. She shook her head slowly. I can't, Richard. I care for you, but I can't. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him, but his eyes still carried a flicker of hope, as if refusal didn't fully close the door. Then hear my second wish, he said softly. She drew in a slow breath, wary but leaning in. There's a boy in the next room, 16. I've heard the doctors. His kidneys are failing. He needs a donor, and they haven't found one. If when my heart gives out, my kidneys will still be good. If I can't save myself, maybe I can save him. Will you promise me? Push the doctors. Don't let the bureaucracy steal the chance. I don't have family left to advocate for me. I need you. Suzanne's hands tightened on her knees. The image of that boy she had seen him joking weakly with nurses, his fear just beneath the humor rose in her mind. Richard, you know there's a process. Approvals, ethics boards, forms. His voice firmed. I know. But you care. You won't let them bury me without trying. Please. She hesitated, then finally said. I can't promise the outcome. But I promise I'll fight for it. I'll talk to the doctors. I'll try. His shoulders eased, and he reached out, his hand warm against hers. That's all I ask. Thank you. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the soft hum of machines. Then suddenly he grimaced, his hand tightening painfully. It's tight my chest, he gasped. Suzanne leapt up, alarm racing through her. Stay with me, she urged, pressing the call button. Staff rushed in. The monitor spiked wildly. Code blue. Someone shouted, and Suzanne was shoved back as the team swarmed. Richard's eyes locked on hers, even as the chaos unfolded. His lips formed words she could barely hear. "Don't forget." Tears burned her eyes. "I won't," she whispered fiercely. But her voice was drowned in the storm of orders and alarms. She backed toward the wall, her pulse hammering as she realized the promise she had made was about to be tested sooner than she ever imagined. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of the hospital corridor, turning the linoleum floor into a muted checkerboard. Suzanne walked briskly toward the administrative wing, her steps clipped. Her mind restless after the long night. Richard had survived the code blue, but barely. His heart was weak, his body exhausted. What haunted her was not the image of the crash cart or the doctor's voice shouting orders, but his last whispered plea before the monitor screamed again. Don't forget. She couldn't. That promise had burrowed into her bones. Now she found herself standing outside the frosted glass door of Mr. Hargrove, the hospital's legal officer. He was a man in his late 50s, heavyset, graying at the temples, with the permanent air of someone who measured every word for liability. He looked up as she entered, his eyes cool behind rectangular glasses. "Suzanne Matthews, ICU nurse," he said without needing an introduction. "What can I do for you?" She clasped her hands to still their tremor. "It's about Richard Carter in room 308. He's expressed a clear wish. If he passes, he wants his kidneys donated directly to the boy next door, the one with end-stage renal failure. He asked me to make sure it happens." Hargrove leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach. "Directed donations are complicated. Liability issues. Consent forms, witness validation, medical compatibility. Without airtight paperwork, it's impossible." She pushed forward. "He gave me a written note. He asked me personally. We can get it signed, documented. Please. The boy doesn't have time." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "Nurse Matthews, your compassion is admirable. But compassion doesn't protect this hospital from lawsuits. Unless Mr. Carter's wishes are documented formally, witnessed by family or legal guardians, the system cannot honor them. I advise you to stay within your scope of duty." She left the office with her heart pounding, her fists tight. Outside, in the cafeteria, the air smelled of coffee and fried eggs. She sat at a corner table, barely touching her toast. Richard had once told her about Sunday dinners with his family: fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, laughter echoing in a kitchen now forever silenced. That memory was his legacy. And if she didn't fight for him, those echoes would vanish completely. She stood suddenly. Determination replacing despair. She needed to check the file. If the consent form existed, she could present it to the transplant team. Back in the nurse's station, she pulled the chart for Richard Carter. Her stomach dropped. The consent form was missing. The section that should have contained his signature and directive was simply gone. Pages shuffled as she searched again and again, but the absence was stark. Someone had removed it. Her breath came faster. Carla, her coworker, entered the station just then, her eyes flicking toward Suzanne with a wary look. Carla had always been steady, competent, but cautious to a fault. "You were with Richard late last night," Carla said quietly, almost accusingly. "Word gets around. I had to report it." Suzanne's head snapped up. "Report it? To who?" "To the head nurse. It looked improper. Midnight meetings with a patient. If anyone found out, it could jeopardize your license." Anger surged through Suzanne, tempered only by disbelief. "Carla, he gave me his last wishes. He's not asking for comfort, he's asking for justice. And now his paperwork is gone. Don't you see what this means?" Carla's face softened, but she shook her head. "You're getting too close. You'll drown yourself in this." Suzanne turned away, biting back words. But as she walked down the hall, her resolve sharpened. She wasn't drowning, she was fighting. Later that afternoon, she was returning files to the storage room when Daisy, the therapy dog, padded alongside her handler. Daisy stopped suddenly near a records cart, pawing insistently at the lower drawer. Her handler tugged gently at the leash, but Daisy whined, scratching again at the edge. Curious, Suzanne knelt and pulled the drawer open. Wedged behind a stack of old reports was a folded slip of paper. Her heart skipped as she smoothed it out. It was the midnight note Richard had given her. "Come to my room at midnight. It's urgent. Come alone." His handwriting, undeniable. Proof that he had entrusted her, that his intent was real and recorded. The timing was uncanny, almost uncanny enough to feel like Richard himself had guided Daisy's nose. She tucked the note carefully into her uniform pocket, her mind racing. This wasn't the official consent form, but it was evidence. Enough to show Oppo that his wish was genuine, Enough to fight Hargrove. Enough to keep her promise. In the evening, Suzanne sat at Richard's bedside. His breathing was shallow, his skin waxy. But when she took his hand, his eyes opened faintly. "Still here," he murmured. "Still fighting." She held up the note. "I found it, Richard. The proof. They can't ignore this." His lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. "Good. Don't let them stop you." As his eyelids drifted shut, Suzanne felt the weight of both their lives pressing on her shoulders. It wasn't just about saving the boy. It was about ensuring that Richard's story didn't end as another line in a medical chart. The system would resist, she knew that. Carla might keep doubting her. Hargrove would bury himself in liability. But she had something now. A sliver of truth, a scrap of paper. And a vow she would not break. Walking back through the corridor, the hospital lights buzzing above her, she whispered to herself. "If the system won't fight for him, then I will." And in that whisper was a spark strong enough to carry her into the storm that waited. The ICU lights were harsher at night, buzzing with a sterile hum that pressed into Suzanne's skull as she walked back toward room 308. She had barely slept, the note in her pocket folded and refolded so many times the creases threatened to tear. Richard's breathing had grown weaker, his color paler. Every instinct in her body screamed that time was slipping, like sand leaking through clenched fists. At the nurse's station, the air shifted suddenly. The intercom crackled overhead. "Code blue, ICU, code blue." Suzanne's stomach dropped. She knew before the words finished echoing which room they meant. She ran, her shoes smacking against the linoleum, weaving past startled visitors and rushing staff. Inside Richard's room, chaos exploded. His body jerked under compressions, the monitor shrilling its merciless flatline. A doctor barked orders. "Epinephrine, 1 milligram, charged to 200. The defibrillator paddles pressed against his chest, his frame arching, then falling limp again. Suzanne's breath hitched, but she forced her way forward. "Wait!" She shouted over the noise, her hand gripping the folded note like a lifeline. He made his wishes clear. "If he goes, his kidneys." Mr. Hargrove's voice cut her off sharply. He had appeared in the doorway, his presence heavy as a gavel. "This is not the time, Nurse Matthews. Step back." She spun toward him, her voice raw. "It's exactly the time. He wanted them to save the boy next door. We have proof." Hargrove's face hardened. "Proof without legality is worthless. Without a notarized directive, without family witnesses, this conversation ends here." Her chest tightened, fury flaring. Around her the team continued, compressions pounding rhythm into Richard's fragile body. "You're letting bureaucracy kill 2 people instead of 1, she spat. But hands pulled her back, an older nurse whispering. "Suzanne, don't get yourself suspended." Richard's lips moved faintly, his eyes barely open, locking on hers through the blur of bodies. She knew what he was saying without hearing it. "Don't forget." She tried to push forward again, but Hargrove blocked her path. "You are done here," he said firmly. "Leave the room." Her hands shook as she was forced back into the hallway, the door slamming shut behind her. The corridor spun with fluorescent glare, but her ears caught another sound that twisted her stomach. Down the hall, in the room of the boy Richard had spoken about, the monitor beeped erratically. She rushed there, her heart hammering. Through the half-open blinds, she saw him, a pale figure against white sheets, his mother clutching his hand. His chest rose and fell shallowly. The machine beside him wailing in uneven tones. "Please, God," his mother sobbed. "Don't take him yet." Suzanne pressed her palm to the cool glass, her throat tight. 2 lives tethered by a thread, one slipping away, one waiting for a miracle that bureaucracy seemed eager to smother. She turned back toward the ICU, anger surging hotter than fear. Inside, they were still fighting for Richard. But she knew even if they pulled him back, it would only be temporary. His body was failing. And if the hospital delayed, the boy's chance would vanish with him. She leaned against the wall, her fists pressed to her forehead. For a moment, she let herself slip into the inner voice she kept buried. Justice isn't paperwork. It's a heartbeat carried forward. It's dignity honored in the silence after death. What am I doing if not this? Why did I become a nurse if not to protect the ones with no one left? The intercom blared again. 30 minutes in. Minimal response. Staff streamed past her, their faces grim. She straightened, gripping the note like a weapon. "I won't let you disappear, Richard," she whispered. "Not like this." She hurried to the nearest phone, dialing frantically. But when the OPO line picked up, Hargrove appeared again, his voice sharp as glass. "Don't you dare bypass procedure, Matthews. You'll lose your license. Do you understand? She covered the receiver with her hand, her teeth clenched. I understand that a 16-year-old boy might die because you're afraid of signatures. His jaw twitched, but his tone remained icy. Intent is not law. If you persist, you will be removed from this hospital before dawn. For the first time that night, fear pricked her resolve. Her career, her livelihood, her future, she saw them all teetering on the edge. But then she thought of Richard's family dinners he would never taste again, of the boy's mother crying into the sterile air, of the promise she had whispered while sirens of life and death screamed around her. She steadied her breath. If justice costs me everything, then so be it. The monitor in the boy's room gave another warning wail. Nurses rushed in. Suzanne felt her spine lock, her heart choosing before her mind did. She raised the receiver again, her voice steady this time as she said into the phone. This is Nurse Suzanne Matthews, St. Mary's Hospital, Richmond. I have a patient in cardiac arrest who has expressed directed donation wishes. I have physical evidence of intent. You need to send a coordinator now. Behind her, Hargrove's footsteps pounded closer, his voice thunderous. You have no authority. But Suzanne didn't lower her voice. This is his last chance. You need to act. The person on the line answered firmly. Understood. We're dispatching a team. Suzanne hung up, her hands trembling, her heart both terrified and alive with purpose. She turned, meeting Hargrove's glare head-on. Do whatever you want to me, she said. But I won't let you bury him without honoring his last gift. His face flushed with anger. But in his silence she saw something else, a flicker of doubt, perhaps even shame. The alarms from Richard's room wailed again, pulling both of them back toward the storm. Suzanne moved with the team, but her mind carried the weight of what she had done. The rules were broken, the line crossed. And now everything hung in the balance. Richard's heartbeat, the boy's fragile tomorrow, and her own future. Yet even as the world spun with sirens and orders, Suzanne knew one truth with iron certainty. The fight for justice had begun, and she would not stand down. The hospital seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own that night, every monitor beeping, every intercom call echoing through Suzanne's chest like a drumbeat, counting down to a choice that could not be unmade. Richard lay behind the doors of the ICU, his life measured in weak flickers on a screen. While only a few steps away the boy next door slid further into danger. His young body too frail to hold out much longer. Suzanne's call to the organ procurement organization had been made. The wheels were already in motion, though the storm she had unleashed was far from settled. Mr. Hargrove confronted her again in the hallway, his voice low but cutting. You've crossed a line that will end your career, Matthews. You went outside the chain of command. Do you even understand the liability you've opened us to? Suzanne stood straighter than she felt, her hands still trembling from adrenaline. I understand a young man may live because Richard's voice was heard. That matters more than liability. He scoffed, shaking his head. Intent scribbled on paper isn't enough. When this blows up, you'll be standing alone. For a moment doubt brushed her. But then she thought of the boy's mother's tears, of Richard's eyes in that midnight room, of the vows she had spoken when no one else could hear. She forced her voice steady. I won't be standing alone. Not if the truth comes out. She turned and walked away before he could reply, her pulse hammering but her spine unbent. In the staff lounge, she found Carla hunched over a cup of coffee, her face weary. Suzanne closed the door behind her and said quietly, I need you. Carla looked up, guilt flickering in her eyes. I reported you because I was scared, Suzanne. I didn't want you to lose everything. Suzanne sat across from her, leaning in. You saw him give me that note. You know what he asked. I can't carry this alone. Be my witness. Help me. Carla hesitated, twisting the paper cup in her hands. For a long moment she said nothing. Finally, with a breath that sounded like surrender, she nodded. I'll back you. I'll tell them what I saw. Relief crashed over Suzanne, so suddenly she almost sagged against the chair. Thank you, she whispered. Carla added softly. Don't make me regret this. A knock at the door interrupted them. A man in a dark jacket introduced himself as the OPO coordinator. His tone was brisk but not unkind. We received your call, Nurse Matthews. We'll need to see the evidence you mentioned. Suzanne pulled the folded note from her pocket, smoothing it carefully across the table. The coordinator studied it, then glanced between the two women. And you're willing to testify you saw the patient hand this over, and heard his wishes? Carla's voice trembled but held. Yes. I saw it with my own eyes. The coordinator nodded. That's enough to initiate compatibility testing. If his organs are viable, and the boy is a match, we can proceed. But timing is critical. Even as he spoke, the intercom crackled. Code blue. ICU. Suzanne's stomach turned cold. She ran with the coordinator back to Richard's room. The team inside was fighting again, sweat streaking their brows, the air thick with the metallic tang of panic. Richard's body jerked under compressions, his skin pale and clammy. Suzanne's eyes locked on his face. And for a heartbeat she thought she saw him looking back at her, silently reminding her. Don't forget. The coordinator spoke quickly with the lead physician, producing credentials and explaining the evidence. There was pushback, sharp words about protocols and lawsuits, but then the ethics committee chair arrived, summoned by the urgency of Suzanne's call. An older woman with sharp eyes, she listened in silence as the coordinator explained. Then she said simply, "The law allows it. If we have witnesses and written intent, the donor's voice must be honored." Hargrove's face turned a shade darker, but he said nothing as the chair's authority overrode his objections. The coordinator gave the order to prepare for organ recovery if circulation ceased. The room shifted, the chaos narrowing into grim focus. Suzanne felt her chest ache, torn between wanting Richard to hold on and knowing that his release might mean life for another. Outside in the hall, Daisy sat by the boy's room, her head resting on her paws, as if keeping vigil. Suzanne paused beside the dog, her hand brushing over the soft fur. "He's holding on for you," she whispered. Not sure if she meant the boy or Richard or perhaps both. Hours bled into each other. Richard was stabilized but fragile, each breath drawn through machines. Meanwhile the boy's vitals continued to falter. The OPO team moved swiftly, drawing blood, running cross-match tests. At last the coordinator returned with the answer. "He's a match." Suzanne's knees almost gave out, relief and sorrow colliding in a single wave. The boy had a chance. Richard's wish was possible. She went to his bedside, sitting quietly. His eyes fluttered open, glazed but aware. She held his hand and whispered, "They said yes. You'll help him." "I promised, and it's happening." A tear slid down his cheek, his lips forming the faintest curve of a smile. "Good," he mouthed. Her chest broke open with grief and pride at once. She bent closer. "You're not forgotten, Richard. You never will be." His breath rattled faintly, and for a long while she stayed there, her head bowed beside his hand, the machines marking the fragile tether between life and legacy. The storm of bureaucracy, of fear and resistance, was not over. But in that moment Suzanne knew she had shifted the tide. Justice had not been loud or triumphant. It had been carved from stubbornness, from truth held tight against the pressure to let go. And though her career now balanced on a knife's edge, she felt no regret. For the first time since the night began, she felt the weight of her promise easing, just slightly, replaced by the quiet strength of knowing she had kept faith with the dying. The boy down the hall still needed his chance. Richard still needed peace. And Suzanne, trembling but resolute, knew she would see it through to the end. The dawn broke pale over Richmond. The hospital parking lot glistening with last night's rain, as if the earth itself had been crying. Inside St. Mary's, the hallways were quieter than they had been in hours. Yet Suzanne felt every sound with heightened clarity, the squeak of rubber soles, the faint hiss of oxygen, the soft hum of machines that decided who would see another sunrise. Richard had not lived to see that dawn. His body had finally surrendered just before 4 a.m. The monitor fading into a single line that stretched thin and unbroken, the sound of absence. The OPO team moved swiftly then, their faces calm, professional, reverent. They prepared him, and for Suzanne every moment carried the weight of a sacred ritual. She had stayed at his bedside until the end, holding his hand, whispering over and over, "You are not forgotten. Your voice is heard." Now she sat outside the operating room where the boy, the pale teenager from next door, was being prepped for the transplant. His mother paced the hall, her hands twisting together like ropes fraying under pressure. When she saw Suzanne, she broke into tears, clutching at her arm. "They said a match came through at the last moment. They said it's a miracle. My son has a chance now. Do you know who it was?" Suzanne swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. She wanted to say Richard's name, to shout it so the world would know, but confidentiality wrapped around her like chains. Still, she leaned close and said softly, "It was someone who wanted to leave goodness behind. Someone who wanted your son to live." The woman pressed her hands to her mouth, sobbing. And for Suzanne, that was enough. Hours passed. The surgery went on through the morning, the tension stretching thinner and thinner until finally the doors opened. The surgeon stepped out, his mask hanging loose around his neck. He looked tired but satisfied. The transplant was successful. The kidney is functioning. He'll need close monitoring. But he has a future now. The boy's mother collapsed into a chair, weeping with relief. Suzanne pressed her hands together, whispering a silent thank you that carried Richard's name even if no one else could hear it. In the days that followed, the hospital buzzed with whispers. Some called Suzanne reckless for going outside the chain of command. Others called her courageous. Carla kept her word, standing by Suzanne when questioned, confirming the note, the late-night meeting, the witness of Richard's wishes. Hargrove remained silent in the ethics committee meeting, his jaw tight, his reputation bruised. He didn't apologize, but he no longer blocked the path. Policy discussions began, murmurs of updating procedures to honor patient intent more clearly, so that no future nurse would have to risk everything to keep a promise. Suzanne found herself both exhausted and strangely lighter. She had not saved Richard's life, but she had carried his voice, his dignity, his legacy into another boy's tomorrow. That mattered. That was justice. Even if it did not roar. A week later, she walked outside the hospital into the crisp Virginia air. Staff had gathered near a small patch of garden by the side entrance. A young dogwood tree had been planted there, its branches slender but reaching upward. A plaque had been set in the soil. In memory of Richard Carter, whose last gift gave another a tomorrow. Suzanne stood among them, her uniform jacket pulled tight, her throat thick. Daisy, the therapy dog, curled at the base of the tree, her head resting on her paws as if standing guard. The boy's mother was there too, though her son remained in recovery. She caught Suzanne's gaze, tears bright in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." Suzanne only nodded, her lips pressing together. It wasn't her thanks to take, but she accepted it on Richard's behalf. Later that evening, she returned alone. The garden was empty, the sky streaked with the last glow of sunset. She sat on the bench near the tree, the plaque glinting softly in the fading light. For the first time in days she allowed herself to cry, not hurried tears behind supply closets but deep, unguarded sobs that shook through her chest. She spoke softly into the cool air. "You did it, Richard. You're not gone. A boy is alive because of you. Your name will not vanish." The branches of the young dogwood swayed gently as if in reply. The leaves whispering against each other in the evening breeze. Suzanne leaned back, her eyes closing. Exhaustion finally taking her but also peace. She knew her career might still face scrutiny, investigations, maybe even punishment. But she also knew she would not regret a single choice. She had been tested, and when the moment came, she had chosen the promise over fear. In her heart, she heard again the words she had whispered at his bedside. "I won't forget." And now she never would. Weeks later, when she walked past the boy's room and saw him sitting up, pale but smiling faintly as he played with a deck of cards, Suzanne felt something uncoil inside her. She lingered only a moment at the door, not stepping in, not intruding. But when he looked up and their eyes met, there was recognition, a spark as if some invisible thread had connected them. He lifted his hand in a shy wave. She returned it with a small smile before walking on, her steps lighter than they had been in months. She didn't need his words. She had already heard the only ones that mattered. On the radio weeks later, when she drove home under the fading light, a news segment briefly mentioned the case. A story of a nurse who fought to honor a dying man's last wish, and a boy who now had a second chance at life. The announcer's voice called it, an example of justice quiet but profound. Suzanne turned the volume down, a tear slipping down her cheek as she drove. She didn't need headlines. She carried the story inside her. And though she rarely spoke of it again, whenever she passed the dogwood tree outside the hospital, she would pause, brush her hand against its growing branches. And remember, the story was not about her, not truly. It was about a man who refused to be erased, a boy who lived, and a promise kept in the silence between two heartbeats. Justice had not roared, but it had spoken, steady and sure. And in that voice, Richard Carter still lived.